2,000 years, poets have sung this city's praises. Its subtle moods, its monuments, its cultural riches. Its stones record the passing generations, changes in power, changes in taste. Each age adds its monuments, and the city adapts, weaving every innovation into the fabric of its glorious tapestry. Everywhere, the present mingles with the past. Capital of a rich and varied country, Paris represents a way of life. The Paris of today reflects the traditions, historical currents, and cultural complexities of France's diverse regions. Everything leaves its mark here. The ideal visit to France is an encounter with history. It traces power, secular and spiritual, crosses paths with invaders, illuminates developments in art and architecture, moves through ever-changing landscapes. It's a voyage of discovery through the cultural and geographical mosaic that is France. Just 15 miles southwest of Paris stands a magnificent and imposing symbol of the French monarchy, the Château of Versailles. Originally a country hunting lodge built for Louis XIII, the palace was enlarged to house the court, some 6,000 people, by the Sun King, Louis XIV. It was France's political capital and the seat of royal power from 1682 to 1789. Every detail is intended to project the glory and authority of the absolute monarch. There is no sense of intimacy. Even the king's chamber is a place of ritual and display. Every morning, privileged noblemen would assemble to witness the awakening of the king, an event comparable to the rising of the sun. Louis's taste for self-glorification knew no bounds. He celebrated himself as architect and warrior. For over 70 years, he was the unquestioned center of French life, and Versailles represented the height of luxury and style. In the dazzling Galerie des Glaces, 17 tall mirrors face 17 large windows to reflect the setting sun. Life at the court was a never-ending spectacle in a spectacular decor. An intricate maze of formal French gardens, designed by André Le Nôtre, surround the palace. The fountains and waterworks are masterpieces of art and engineering. Over 30,000 workers toiled on the palace grounds. The costs of construction and maintenance brought the kingdom to the brink of bankruptcy. In 1789, revolution replaced divine right as the destiny of kings, and the curtain came down on the royal spectacle of Versailles. "30 miles northeast, at the edge of Normandy, is another garden. The Gardens of Giverny, created by the Impressionist painter Claude Monet, have come to symbolize the tremendous inventiveness of late 19th century French art. The garden itself is an Impressionist work and the subject of many of his most beloved paintings. Monet moved to Giverny in 1883 and died here 43 years later at the age of 85. His two gardens, the Clos Normand Flower Garden and the Water Garden, were created as environments where he could study and paint the fleeting effects of sunlight on natural surfaces. The shifting light and colors in the Water Garden were the subject of his last great series, Water Lilies. These paintings, of nuanced and subtle reflections, a world in constant flux and flow, redefine the rules of artistic composition. They mark the triumph of individual impressions over the ordered certainties and vast perspectives of Versailles. Normandy is horse country. It has been since the 14th century, when knights bred small, tough Norman horses for warfare. Great manors lie scattered over the countryside. These ancient estates remain the guardians of Normandy's agricultural heritage. The Château du Breuil, set among glades and orchards, works alchemy with apple cider. Distilled and carefully aged in oaken casks, it's transformed into a regional specialty, Calvados. Half-timbered houses in a variety of patterns is the distinctive style of Norman architecture. Beuvron-en-Auge is a perfect example of the typical Norman village. A collection of houses from the 15th and 16th centuries surround its little square. The manor was built by the powerful d'Harcourt family, who traced their lineage back to the Viking invaders of the 8th century. It's these barbarians from the north who give the land its name. Originally a Viking port, Honfleur is situated at the mouth of the Seine River, the major raiding route to Paris. It was the primary port of commerce with England after the Norman conquest in the 11th century. Today, the Vieux Bassin is a sleepy little pleasure port, ringed by houses sheathed in distinctive slate shingles. The port was a favorite subject of the Impressionist painters, many of whom, including Monet, found inspiration here. What once attracted Vikings, easy access to the capital, now attracts summer visitors. The nearby beaches of Deauville epitomize summer pleasure for generations of French and Englishmen. But the beaches of Normandy hold other memories that will never find their way into a summer scrapbook. On June 6, 1944, this wide expanse of sand, Omaha Beach, saw the most brutal fighting of the D-Day invasion. 2,500 U.S. troops struggled ashore here under withering Nazi fire. 1,000 never left the beach. The land is still scarred by the brutal fighting. At nearby Pointe du Hoc, U.S. Rangers scaled the cliffs to silence a battery of Nazi artillery. They held off counterattacks for 2 days. The site has been granted in perpetuity to the United States. American servicemen killed in the Battle of Normandy are buried in the American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer, overlooking Omaha Beach. 9,386 American troops are buried here, and a memorial honors another 1,500 whose bodies were never found. At Bayeux, the first town liberated in the Battle of Normandy, is the record of another cross-channel invasion. The tapestry of Queen Mathilde depicts details of dress, weapons, and tools with a remarkable fidelity that brings the 11th century to life. In 1066, William the Conqueror left Normandy for England with a 6,000-man army. He defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings to win the English crown. The story is told in 58 panels embroidered on a 70-meter roll of linen. A curious detail: horses mired in the mud before a strange structure, the Mont Saint-Michel. Since Celtic times, the island has been sacred ground. In 708, the Archangel Michael appeared to Bishop Aubert and ordered him to build a chapel on the summit. Over the centuries, it grew into the most influential Benedictine abbey in France, and an architectural wonder of the Western world. During the 100 Years' War, it resisted every siege. It was the only part of northern France never to fall into English hands. 80 meters above the sea, a gilded statue of Saint Michael still protects the abbey. The Grand Rue retains the bustling atmosphere of a medieval fair that has greeted pilgrims for 1,000 years. The steep and narrow summit of the rock made conventional construction impossible. The genius of the abbey's builders inspires quiet awe. The entire complex is constructed vertically along the island's cliffs. A monastery built in 3 levels, Le Merveille, was added to the church in the early 13th century. The upper story is graced by the cloister, a place of solemn serenity. Below, the refectory, softly illuminated by recessed windows, the room has a delicate rhythm despite its massive size. The huge Gothic hall on the floor below is more ornate. The knight's room housed Saint-Michel's defenders. The secret of the abbey's construction becomes visible below the church, where enormous pillars and a series of crypts transfer its weight to bedrock. The structure doubles the height of the natural island. The sound of beating eggs greets a curious visitor to a culinary delight. The famous omelets of La Mère Poulard. Mount Saint-Michel's fame rests not only on architecture, but also on the bay's extraordinary tides. Depending on the orbit of the moon, their amplitude can reach 50 feet. But while the tide is still out at Cancale, across the bay, men are hard at work. In this little harbor, one doesn't fish, but cultivates. Cancale is entirely devoted to the cultivation and consumption of oysters. Prized by the Romans, the acclaimed flavor of Cancale's oysters is said to be derived from the powerful tides that wash over them daily. The creuses, or concave shell, are the most numerous. Plate, or flat-shelled, are less common. The harvest of the day can be sampled at the many bars and restaurants that line the harbor. Saint-Malo, the proudest port of Brittany, owes its prosperity and reputation to the exploits of its mariners. The 16th century explorer Jacques Cartier set sail from here, and Breton fishermen braved the North Atlantic in search of cod off Terra Nova. Port St. Vincent, crowned by the arms of Anne de Bretagne, leads to a web of narrow cobbled streets. The granite buildings were meticulously reconstructed after the town's destruction in World War II. The imposing fortifications are largely the work of Vauban, Louis XIV's famed military architect. In the 17th century, Saint-Malo's renowned corsairs wreaked such havoc on English shipping that the town was under constant threat of attack for over 75 years. State-sponsored pirates like Robert Surcouf have become the stuff of legend and the ideal of every Breton sailor. Soft light, enveloping, fluid as the air itself, the light preferred by kings. The Loire River courses through the very heart of France, carrying a rich historic legacy. For hundreds of years, the Loire was a major avenue of trade. Shallow-bottom boats plied the river from the sea to Orléans. The lords of the region's castles grew rich and powerful from the valley's natural wealth. Control of this garden region was crucial to any king. Little river ports like Caen Saint-Martin bustled with traders and sailors who struggled with the unpredictable currents and shifting sandbars to hurry delicate produce to market. Those days are long past, but the region's greatest product is still produced in prodigious quantities and great variety: wine. Slight variations in soil, air, and weather make possible the production of a host of popular wines: Sancerre, Muscadet, Vouvray, Bourgueil, Saumur, and Chinon, the wine preferred by Rabelais. The soft sandstone subsoil makes for excellent wine caves. Founded in 1101, the Abbey de Fontevraud became the largest religious center in Western Christendom. Its Romanesque kitchen served a monastic community of over 800 monks, nuns, lepers, reformed prostitutes, and noble widows. It was a favorite retreat for wayward aristocratic daughters. Support of the royal family guaranteed the abbey's fortunes until the Revolution. The 16th century paintings in the Salle Capitulaire celebrate the fact that Fontevraud was ruled by an abbess, as dictated by its radical founder, Robert d'Abricel. The impressive Romanesque church houses 13th century effigies of the royal Plantagenet, who ruled both England and a large part of France. The crusading Richard the Lionhearted and Isabelle d'Angoulême, who poisoned his brother, King John. Eleanor d'Aquitaine and her English husband, King Henry II, founder of the Plantagenet line that fused French and English destinies for over 200 years. Chinon was Henry Plantagenet's favorite castle. It was also at Chinon that the final drive to rid France of English domination began. Here, in 1429, a young shepherdess recognized the disguised Charles VII and convinced him to give her an army. It's in Chinon that the public life of Joan of Arc began. Further down the river, at Blois, the Middle Ages ended and the Renaissance bloomed, transforming the French art of living. For nearly a century, Blois was the principal residence of the kings of France. The chateau's main gate is adorned by an imposing statue of King Louis XII. Built in several stages on the site of a medieval fortress, the chateau offers a harmonious architectural resume of Gothic, Renaissance, and classic styles. The 15th century Gothic wing of Louis XII is peppered with small sculptures and sealed with the king's insignia, the porcupine. His motto, "From near and afar, I can defend myself." Dating from the 13th century, the Salle des États, the council chamber, is the oldest room in the building. The 16th century François I wing is a masterpiece of the French Renaissance. Signed obsessively with the king's symbol, a salamander, it features a stunning spiral staircase housed in a richly carved octagonal tower. Light and elegant on the outside, the Renaissance chateau was the site of intrigues within. It was here, in 1588, that the royal rival, the Duc de Guise, was called to the king's chamber and ruthlessly murdered by guards as Henry III peered at the scene from behind curtains. A monogram combining the initials of Henry II, Catherine de' Medici, his wife, and Diane de Poitiers, his mistress, decorates the Queen's bedroom. The Chateau of Chenonceau was given as a present to Diane de Poitiers by Henry II. She created the formal gardens that give the chateau the aspect of a pleasure palace. The medieval battlements have been replaced by towers and spires that signal a cultural change. The chateau is no longer a defensive structure, but a space for balls and the display of wealth and culture. On Henry's death, Catherine de' Medici evicted Diane and took the chateau for her own residence. She constructed the Grand Gallery that spans the River Cher for 200 feet. Elegant, Florentine in style, the room served as a hospital during the First World War and as a bridge for resistance members during the Second. The southern shore of the river was in Free France, the northern in occupied territory. Catherine bequeathed Chenonceau to Louise de Lorraine, wife of Henry III, her favorite son. On Henry's death, Louise decorated her chamber in black. She lived out her life in mourning and in prayer. Set in a landscape park, Azay-le-Rideau is another medieval structure transformed into a Renaissance jewel. In 1527, the chateau was confiscated by François I from his corrupt finance minister. His insignia, and that of his wife Anne de Bretagne, marked the building as royal property. Like all the Renaissance chateaux, Azay-le-Rideau has something of a feminine air. The moats and towers are purely decorative. Balzac called the chateau a multifaceted diamond set in the river Indre. Cheverny is one of the great post-Renaissance chateaux of the Loire Valley. A classic, symmetrical and austere exterior gives way to a sumptuously decorated interior. The painter Jean Mosier labored here for 10 years. The king's chamber, required in every royal chateau, has never been visited by a king. The guard room features a Gobelin tapestry, the abduction of Helen. Cheverny is the most lavishly furnished of the Loire chateaux, and its interior gives a fair impression of aristocratic life under Louis XIII. The trophy room displays the horns of over 2,000 deer taken on the chateau's grounds. Royal chateaux are strung along the Loire like jewels on a necklace. Each reflects a facet of the region's history. Saumur was a Protestant stronghold during the religious wars, while at Amboise, Catholic François II impelled 1,200 Protestants on the chateau walls. But from the air, the bloody history recedes. The rivers, chateaux, vineyards, and rolling hills offer a harmonious view of the languor and sweetness that the river carries on its slow descent through the heart of France. In Burgundy, the earth seems old and familiar. Inhabited since prehistoric times, tamed by medieval monks, it is fitted to the eye and hand of man. The Gallo-Roman ruins on Mount Alésia mark the genesis of France's collective memory. Here in 52 BC, Roman legions under Caesar crushed a revolt by Gallic tribes after a 6-week siege. Vercingetorix, leader of the Gauls, is France's first hero. The Middle Ages brought a flowering of Christianity to Burgundy. Of all the monastic orders active at the time, none left quite so touching a memory in stone as the Cistercians, who established Fontenay in 1118. Simplicity, unadorned elegance, their structures reflect the precepts they lived by: humility, poverty, service. The Cistercians sought to emulate the early church before it had gained worldly power. They lived simple lives of contemplation and cooperation, working in the fields and the scriptorium. The rooms are animated by pure rhythms of the early Gothic. Fontenay is the best preserved of the Cistercian abbeys in France. The people of Saumur take great pleasure in meeting strangers, reads the welcoming sign. But the gates and walls that surround this medieval town suggest that not all strangers came in peace. In fact, it's the ancient towers and ramparts that gave the town its Latin name, Senemuro Castrum. The Gothic church of Notre Dame is the town's great treasure. Its lines are light and graceful. Among the carvings on the northern door, saints and monsters, is the sign of the Dukes of Burgundy, the escargot, a regional delicacy. In Saumur-en-Auxois, the present and the past blend seamlessly. A small, fortified village set among vineyards, Vézelay was one of the most important sites of the medieval world. pilgrims thronged its streets to venerate the relics of Saint Mary Madeleine. In 1146, Saint Bernard preached the Second Crusade here with King Louis VII in attendance. In 1190, Richard the Lion-Hearted and King Philip August assembled their troops for the Third Crusade. The basilica was the centerpiece of a large Franciscan abbey. By the 19th century, the church was in ruins, a victim of revolution and neglect. The young architect Viollet-le-Duc worked on reconstruction from 1840 to 1859. The present facade is his romantic interpretation of 12th century art. The original sculptures are preserved in a small museum on the site. The narthex, an unusual antechamber to the church, and its tympanum are original. It shows Christ in his glory. Rays of light descend from his hands to the apostles as he welcomes all the people of the earth. In the nave, soft light from small, high windows accentuates the rhythm of the round arches in contrasting stone. The choir has the ogival arches and much larger windows of the Gothic style. It was added to the basilica at the end of the 12th century. But St. Madeleine's most endearing and unique feature is the elaborate carvings that grace the capitals in the nave. Bible stories, like Daniel in the lion's den, are here illustrated for the illiterate believers of the Middle Ages. The church is a book written in stone. Inspired in every detail, the basilica is a masterpiece. A site of pilgrimage in its own right, Vézelay is also a starting point for one of the 4 pilgrim routes to Santiago of Compostela in Spain. In addition to its architectural and historic splendors, the great glory of Burgundy is its wine. Introduced by the conquering Romans and nurtured by countless monks, the tradition of winemaking is the preoccupation of Beaune, the unofficial capital of the world-renowned Côte d'Or region of vineyards. The cave of the Patriarch, in a former convent, holds over 1 million bottles of fine, aged Burgundy. The Côte d'Or, Golden Coast, is a low hillside of reddish gold soil that stretches for 30 miles north and south of Beaune. A checkerboard of small vineyards, each with a distinctive microclimate, hugs the hill. The names of the villages that line the Côte d'Or have fueled the imagination of wine lovers for generations. Gevrey-Chambertin, Vosne-Romanée, Nuits Saint-Georges, Alox-Corton, Meursault and Chassagne-Montrachet. The value of each year's vintage is determined by the auction price of the wines of the Hôtel Dieu, Beaune's medieval hospital for the poor and aged. After the ravages of the Hundred Years' War, the immensely rich Nicolas Rolin donated vines to construct and endow the hospital. Its geometrically tiled roofs have become a symbol of Burgundy. The flamboyant Gothic building is constructed around a great court, flanked by the kitchens, pharmacies, and sick rooms. Rolin believed that the sick, even if poor, should be in harmonious surroundings. Beneath the ceiling carved with monsters and medieval figures, nurses tended the impoverished people of Beaune in their great hall of the poor. The room has 28 beds for the sick and the dying. Each one generally held 2 people. In the 11th century, the Kingdom of Burgundy was one of the most powerful in feudal Europe. Its possessions stretched far to the south and included the most fabled region of France, Provence. Herb-scented hills, olive trees, an infinite array of greens. The warm sun intensifies flavors and calls forth the song of the cicadas. Provence offers the full range of nature's remarkable palette. Near the village of Roussillon, the earth itself takes on splendid color. According to legend, the land is stained by the blood of Queen Cerimond, who plunged from the cliffs after her cruel husband fed her the heart of her murdered troubadour lover. In truth, Roussillon is the site of the largest ochre deposit in France. Over 17 shades of iron-rich earth have been exploited for dyes, glazes, and pigments. In the Dark Ages, Provence was successively overrun by Goths and Saracens. The region's picturesque perched villages, like Gordes, developed as a means of defense. The tiered buildings clamber up the hillside in a harmonious cubist architecture, topped by the town's 14th century chateau. Strategically positioned on the banks of the Rhone River, Avignon is the major city in this region of far-flung, isolated villages. Its Gothic fortress, the Palace of the Popes, is the result of a bizarre 14th century incident in which the papal court fled political turmoil in Rome to settle in Provence. Its battlements protected papal riches from marauding bands of mercenary soldiers. For nearly 100 years, the Holy See was based at Avignon, and for part of that time, rival popes ruled in Rome. In all, 7 French-born popes ruled here. Their tolerance made the town a haven for Jews and political dissidents of all stripes. They established a university and brought Avignon a cultural reputation that it still enjoys today. Clément VI, a former troubadour with a taste for luxury, doubled the size of the palace. His projects drew artists, craftsmen, and bankers to the city. But Avignon's riches attracted adventurers and con men as well. The Pope's extravagances were denounced by Petrarch, living nearby in exile. He characterized the Avignon papacy as the second Babylonian captivity and charged that the city had become a den of criminals. The battlements overlooked the Petit Palais, home of the Archbishop, and Fort Saint-André, built by the French king to check the Pope's political ambitions. Far below rests the remains of Saint Benezet's bridge. It once spanned the Rhône to the foot of the tower of Philippe le Bel on 22 graceful arches. Legend tells that an angel appeared to the shepherd Benezet and commanded him to build the bridge. People thought him crazy, but he enlisted volunteers and the span was built in only 8 years. Completed in 1185, it was destroyed by floods in the 16th century. Provence owes much of its character to the Roman occupation. Roads were built, trade flourished, and the region found its identity in the Roman way of life. The Pont du Gard is a Roman aqueduct constructed in 19 BC to carry water to Nîmes. It handled a flow of 44 million gallons a day. The ceremonial entrance to the Roman city of Arles was via les Aliscamps, one of the Western world's most famous necropolises. 80 generations lie buried here. The town's antique theater held 12,000 people for plays, dance, and acrobatics. Arles was settled by veterans of the conquering Roman legions. They brought civilization along with their arms, public baths, extensive plumbing, paved streets, and city planning. The frontier capital became a little Rome, and of course it had its arena. Used primarily for bullfights today, the 20,000-seat amphitheater was once the site of gladiatorial combats and public executions. At Place de la République, Arles shows its many faces at a glance. A Roman column stands before the 17th century city hall, and on the north side of the square is a 12th century Romanesque masterpiece, Saint Trophime. The tympanum shows the Last Judgment. The damned are in chains. The character of Arles is not only in its monuments, but in its way of life. A simple walk through the streets gives a notion of the spirit of the south of France. Few traces remain of Arles' most illustrious resident, Vincent van Gogh, but the town remains a gateway to the color and the spirit he expressed in the 200 canvases he produced here. The easy way of life and distinctive light of Provence has produced an unbroken artistic and literary tradition that stretches back to the poets and painters of the Middle Ages. The varied landscapes, their striking contrasts of bleached limestone and soft greens, have seduced innumerable artists. In the modern period, Picasso, Matisse, and Braque all made Provence their home. Perhaps no artistic landscape motif is more closely identified with Provence than the Montagne Sainte-Victoire, so beloved by Cézanne. He painted it 60 times, never quite satisfied. Cézanne's work is central to the development of modern art. Fauvism, Cubism, and later modern schools of painting drew their inspiration from him. Born in Aix-en-Provence in 1839, Cézanne spent his most productive period in this studio on the city's outskirts. It remains as he left it on his death in 1904. Aix-en-Provence retains the character of its great epoch, the 17th century, when it was administrative capital and a center for the law. The Cours Mirabeau, the city's central boulevard, and the cafe life that animates it date from this great period of expansion and national influence. Aix is a city of fountains. The ever-running water cools the baking sun and provides a song that gives the streets their unique charm. Each morning, the majestic public squares and shaded streets of this graceful city come to bustling life. Aix is the premier market town of Provence and has been for centuries. All the region's produce is represented here. Varieties of mushrooms, fruits, and vegetables ripened under Provençal sunshine. And of course, flowers in vast profusion. In Aix, if you can't get to the countryside, rest easy. The countryside will come to you. Aix-en-Provence is less than 20 miles from the sea. But here in Marseille, France's great Mediterranean port, it's a different world. For 2,600 years, sailors have been tying up at the old port. And undoubtedly, fishmongers have been haggling over prices. In 600 BC, Greeks from Asia Minor landed their galleys here. A trading post was established, Massalia, the mother of Marseille, the oldest city of France. Through the centuries, the city's lost nothing of its commercial vitality. The Canebière, Marseille's most famous boulevard, runs from the old port through the heart of the city. Flanked by fashionable residences, it's a symbol of the power of Marseille's successful merchant class. But just off the boulevard, the warren of streets seems half souk, half flea market, with exotic goods offered from every corner of the Mediterranean. Marseille is a melting pot unique in France, a crossroads of Mediterranean and African cultures that delight the senses and gives the city a highly independent character. In the Panier, one of the few old neighborhoods to survive the Second World War, Catalonia, Naples, and Africa's north coast mingle with newer influences from Vietnam and the French West Indies. The Panier sits above the old port, facing Marseille's landmark, the Basilica of Notre-Dame de la Garde, whose gilded statue of the Virgin is visible from miles out at sea. Protectress of the city's sailors, Notre Dame is credited with miraculous rescues at sea. She carries on the tradition of the Mediterranean goddesses who ruled here long before her. The basilica is full of ex-votos that give thanks for the safe return of mariners. From the church's porch, Marseille stretches out like a tapestry. On the Corniche, at the little fishing port Vallon des Oufs, life moves by the rhythms of the sea. It's hard to imagine that the port lies close to the heart of France's second largest city. An old Provençal proverb says, "A fish lives in water and dies in oil." Bouillabaisse, the most famous of Provençal dishes, is traditionally made with fresh fish found only in Mediterranean waters: rascasse, gondin, and congre. Cooked quickly in a delicious stock, seasoned with hints of garlic and saffron, the dish is served with rouille, a spicy Spanish pepper sauce. Guarding the mouth of the port is the Château d'If. The Count of Monte Cristo, its most famous prisoner, is a fictional character. Southeast of Marseille, the land tumbles fitfully into the crystal Mediterranean in a series of dazzling limestone cliffs. The stark and majestic Calanque offer a final contrast in the rich mosaic that is France.